Here's a quick example of bird preying. This is a new tool been written at Penn Productions by Neale for the use of placing feathers and animating feathers on birds. We're just going to work with this simple mesh just to display it. We're going to go into the material and load a library. This library currently only has a couple of feathers in it, just a sort of a blue-green feather mix, and we're then going to go straight down to the setup. The setup is where we can set up all kinds of defaults, hit spacing and lengths and widths of and bend angles for our feathers. So we're going to mirror it on either side, and we're going to start off with a feather direction. We just paint that in with a quick line just to give it a direction that we're going to paint the feathers in. Once we start painting, you can see those feathers begin painting, being placed. The feathers are coming up blue and green because in the load library we had both picked. Choose one, we just get blue feathers. Choose the other and we can get just green feathers. These are materials being placed on planes. As we start painting around the model, we might notice that the angle is not what we'd want. So what we can do is easily just set another feather direction as we're working, just to ensure they're going approximately the direction that we're looking for as we're painting our feathers in. One of the things you might notice as the feathers are being painted, that there's actually a default angle being applied. See, as the surface curves one way, feathers are bent to go out and follow, and then they're also being curved down to contour over the surface. That can be seen right here really well. Paint on this curve, and you can see that they're being applied on that curve. Paint on the other side, and again you can see that they're being applied and following that contour. It's based on this contour angle and a point along the feather, 0.75, where it finds a point out 75% of the length, and it calculates the curve at that point. Now, as we get down here, what we might find is that our default direction is being curved all over the place. That's okay. What we can do is we can actually just finish filling this in, and then we're going to paint the feathers in the direction that we want, as well as even sizes or any other features. Some places where we paint our hit spacing may be too high or too low. This is how many feathers it's generating in a given area. And decreasing that value will cause it to create more feathers. We also have staggering. You'll notice as the feathers are painted, they're being generated up and down so that they don't paint, keep straight edges. That's our stagger value. Increase the stagger value, and that value goes higher. So we can actually paint and make sure that we don't have nice even feathers. We get them overlapping better as we're painting them. Let's just finish filling in the stomach here so that we can start manipulating the feathers a bit and painting them on the surface of the bird, and sizing them and combing them into the directions that they need to be in. So that's pretty good for just getting started. We'd obviously need a lot more, get a lot of gaps in there. So let's then go in and start working on the feathers with the paint to form tools. Paint to form tools here allow us to be able to take a brush, for instance, like a comb, and then be able to comb the angle of the feathers in. So as we comb down the length of the feather, you can see we can adjust its angles. As we've done that, part of the problem with the contour is because they are on the wrong angle, you can see the contours actually was wrong, the bend on the feathers. So we also have a contour brush. Contour brush will just take those feathers now and stick them back to the surface as best it can, try and get that angle correct. So as we paint, if we change what that needs to be through our paint tool, we can easily just hit the contour again and stick them down to the surface. The Fluff Tips tool will allow us to bend up the feathers and have them bend up along their length. And have the feathers stand up. Fluff Base, just increase the weight of the brush, will stand them up on their ends. With the Fluff Tips, we can also hold down Alt, paint in the other direction, and as well as any other tool, to lay them back down again, or bend them along their lengths in the opposite direction if we like. Any point in time we can go back to the contour them back to the surface. This isn't changing the Fluff Base settings. So what we can do is in the Fluff Base go to our Reset brush and reset them. They're going to reset to being flat and not having our default angle. So we can easily just paint that back up again if we want and give it a little bit of surface offset to make sure that they're not stuck through the surface. One thing that might happen is we might end up in a position where, as we're painting back and forth, we've got a few feathers that are sticking up in a couple of places. And we want to get those back to the same values around, or at least try and average out those values. So there's also a blur brush for each brush set. And if we blur that, it's now averaging out the feathers around that area to ensure that they're all fairly similar if we want to make a nice smooth surface going on. Cup tool cups the feathers along their length, so if they're bending along their length. And again, Alt will uncup them if we need be, and of course a reset and a blur. Spread spreads them out, makes the feathers wider at the tips, or holding down Alt, narrower at the tips. If you want to try and vary your width a little bit at the tips of your feathers. Bend is a unique brush that allows us to be able to brush in an angle change. So we can actually bend the feather along its length side to side by just brushing in this direction that we want against the base of the feather. And once again, a reset to be able to reset all those properties. Size allows us to be able to size feathers. This is currently resizing the width and the length accordingly so that they keep the same aspect ratio. But we could also just go to a size length and change up the length of the feathers so we can build our feathers on the bird as we want. There's also min-max values and a paint on selected. Once we have a group of feathers going that we want to manage, we can also say I'm just going to use the select all feathers in this case, and let's just create a feather group called all. Generate the group. Now anytime we want to select that, we can select it and say select group, and we'll get that group back. We can then use the paint on selected to be able to manipulate only a small group of feathers or a large group of feathers, whatever we want to work with. Hide, show, hide, enable, so that we can disable animation on them or whatever else we need to do. All of this can be animated as well. Let's take a bird that's sitting there and needs to then display its feathers. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a Fluff Base with a nice big brush. Oops, and we'll have Animate turned on. And we'll fluff out the feathers on the bird. Maybe we want to use a little bit of Fluff Tips as well. Get them to stand up a little bit more. And now those feathers are actually animated, going through their process. There's also a dynamics section built in. We're going to say select group again and get all our feathers that we're going to apply it to. There's no motion on the bird, but it also has dynamics for the motion. Bake wind. and we'll apply a bake on the wind, and now we'll see that the feathers stand up on the back with the fluffing that we did, and there's a little bit of motion, very, very subtle. I can see them moving around. What we need to just find, it's been set at the center of world space, is a wind icon to work with. So we're just going to tilt that wind icon, point it at the bird in this case, give it a bit more strength, some more turbulence, a bunch of frequency. Reselect the group that we want to apply the wind to. And then bake the wind again. And you'll see that it's baking it, give a given start point to an end point with a step, so there's only keys every 5 frames just to reduce the amount of keys. Lag is for the motion, and we have a multiplier value here as well as for the motion, and then we have a min-max angle that applied on any of them, and essentially we can apply a min-max. So now the feathers fluff up and are blowing in the wind based on the wind icon. Of course, the wind icon and the wind settings can be animated as well as it's baked, and the solution is then baked to the bird. Hope you like bird brain.